Only one person returned to the car that night, and every official record agrees the storm erased everything else. What happened at that isolated gas stop remains disputed, preserved only in dispatch logs, partial camera footage, and the memories of those who waited. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Rory Bell was 32 and worked maintenance for a regional rail yard that operated without pause for weather or holidays. He finished an unexpected overtime shift just after dusk, with snow already climbing the chain link fencing around the yard. With him were Lisa Quinn, who was 28 and managed shift scheduling at the same facility, and Merrick Doyle, who was 35 and inspected incoming freight cars. They had carpooled for months during storm season to cut fuel costs. The plan for the night was ordinary and practical by every account: reach the river town before road crews shut the highway down completely. Their sedan was already running low after the extended shift hours stretched far past schedule. The low fuel warning chimed just past the county line marker. The nearest open station sat alone along a narrow service road hidden behind a dark wall of pine trees. It had one pump island, a small glass front office, and overhead lighting that flickered when gusts surged. Snow moved sideways across the lot in dense, fast-moving curtains that reduced depth perception. They pulled in at 8:14 according to dispatch time, later verified through the station power record and a distant traffic camera 1 mile west. The storm was accelerating rapidly as they stopped beneath the canopy. Rory stayed in the driver's seat with the engine running to keep heat circulating through the vents and defroster. Lisa stepped out to operate the pump, and Merrick followed to check the rear tires for visible damage. The clerk watched from inside through glass heavy with frost, later reporting 3 figures moving beneath the stark canopy lights. Wind shook the metal framework with hollow metallic bangs. Lisa gripped the stiff nozzle with gloved hands that squealed faintly against frozen steel. Merrick crouched near the tire, illuminating the tread with his phone light. Rory observed their shapes blur and sharpen through the spinning snow. Ice rattled along the hood and windshield as gusts funneled into the open canopy sides. The clerk turned away briefly to prepare coffee and warm his hands at the counter. That short moment later became one of the most examined details in the entire investigation. Rory told investigators he glanced down at his phone to confirm a work logistics message that could not wait. He estimated less than 1 minute passed before he raised his eyes again. When he looked back up, only Lisa remained beside the pump. The shape that had been Merrick near the tire was no longer visible anywhere in the lot. Rory cracked the window and called Merrick by name, but the wind swallowed the sound instantly. Lisa stood rigid and fixed her gaze toward the dark boundary of the lot. Rory stepped out into the cold and felt it cut through his coat immediately. The storm roared with a pressure that made normal conversation impossible even at close range. He reached Lisa and asked where Merrick went. She said Merrick had walked toward the trees to take a phone call because reception near the car kept dropping. She described a brief backward wave, his phone lifted near his face, and then his outline dissolving into the blowing snow near the service road edge. She assumed he kept moving forward. Rory headed in that direction and shouted again, but visibility shifted constantly between 20 and 30 feet. Beyond that distance, everything dissolved into a moving wall of white. He returned to the car to retrieve his flashlight and aimed the narrow beam into the snow. The light reflected off endless airborne ice and revealed only tree trunks at the outer edge. Rory walked 10 careful steps into the powder and felt the ground slope downward away from the lot. Wind shoved against his chest hard enough to break his balance twice. A sudden gust rose into a sound later described as tearing fabric across the open lot. Visibility collapsed entirely, and the beam reflected back in blinding sheets. Rory turned back immediately and located the car by its headlamps glowing weakly through the storm haze. Lisa stood near the passenger door, visibly shaking and breathing fast. The clerk stepped into the doorway, yelling that they needed to clear the forecourt because drifting was building under the canopy. Snow had already begun piling around the pump island. Rory paid in cash, with fingers already losing sensation, and hurried back into the driver's seat. The doors closed and the heater labored against the invading cold. They waited in the car for several minutes with the windows partly cracked, calling Merrick into the storm again and again. No reply came back through the wind. At 8:24, Rory called emergency services and reported a missing man last seen walking toward the trees during active severe snowfall. The dispatcher instructed him to remain sheltered and avoid entry into the storm. Road closures delayed response units across multiple sectors. A deputy and a volunteer search team arrived 32 minutes later after navigating blocked lanes and drifting highway sections. By the time searchers reached the station, the storm had already erased all surface tracks around the lot and service road boundary. Fresh snow lay smooth and unbroken from every angle. Teams moved slowly along the tree line using poles and mounted lights. They swept the shallow slope and surrounding brush in overlapping lanes with careful spacing. No footprints were found, no broken branches appeared, no fallen phone or clothing fragments surfaced in the snow. 2 hours into the operation, thermal imaging was deployed across the projected walking radius. It returned no heat signatures consistent with a living person. That result weakened the first working theory of rapid hypothermia collapse somewhere near the tree line. Nothing active registered anywhere near the search perimeter. Investigators then shifted to the possibility of a passing vehicle along the service road. Archived traffic footage from both directions showed no cars or trucks throughout the verified window. Security camera review revealed a 19-second blackout caused by a brief electrical fluctuation at the station. Before the gap, Marek stands by the wheel with phone in hand. After the image returns, only 2 figures remain beneath the canopy while heavy snow fills the air. No movement toward the tree line appears within the narrow camera angle. Dispatch records preserved Rory's initial call and a follow-up call from the clerk, verifying that no individual remained outside the station structures. Additional passerby statements offered no confirmation. Carrier records traced Marek's phone signal to the immediate station area until 8:16. After that final data point, the device transmitted nothing and was never recovered. Search coordination expanded outward along the service road and into frozen drainage culverts guided by terrain analysis and walking range estimates. All assigned grids returned negative results. Helicopter assistance was considered but canceled due to zero visibility and dangerous crosswinds. Ground teams continued until early morning when conditions finally eased. As daylight broke, new crews resumed the search with fresh eyes and full visibility. The snowstorm had left the woods silent and heavily buried. The trees stood locked in ice, branches bowed and rigid, with no visible passageway between them. Every step taken by searchers cracked the crust with a hollow sound. Rory and Lisa were interviewed separately over several days in controlled sessions. Their timelines aligned closely, though Lisa admitted she never physically saw Merrick enter the tree line itself. She stated that her assumption formed during a moment of stress and limited visibility. Investigators found no evidence directly contradicting her statement. Rory admitted that he blamed himself for checking his phone at the wrong moment. He repeated several times that he believed Merrick was only steps away when he looked down. During terrain review, an old shallow excavation was located near the slope edge, concealed by evergreen brush and snowpack. It remained dry and showed no signs of recent disturbance. Ground penetration scans revealed minor hollow pockets beneath hardened drift layers. None indicated recent collapse capable of concealing a person beneath the surface. Crews also examined an abandoned logging trail that ran deeper into the woods beyond the immediate tree line. That trail was completely buried and showed no disturbance. Weeks later, during seasonal thaw, a single boot imprint appeared near a melt channel at the edge of the lot. The toe orientation aimed generally toward the trees. Weather logs confirmed fresh accumulation buried the area less than 1 hour after the station stop. The print size aligned with Merrick footwear range, but lacked confirmatory tread damage. No second track of the same depth layer could be isolated in surrounding melt zones. Freeze-thaw cycles had softened all adjacent impressions beyond usable comparison. Personal history checks revealed no financial distress, no unresolved conflicts, and no indication that Marek intended to disappear. His phone records showed only routine contacts. Family members described him as cautious in winter conditions and unlikely to enter the trees without clear reason. That made his disappearance even harder to reconcile. With no physical body, no evidence of vehicular involvement, and no verified trail, the case entered cold status within the same winter season. Merrick Doyle was officially classified as missing under hazardous weather conditions. Rory left the rail yard within 6 months and relocated to a southern state. He later told coworkers he still hears wind whenever rooms fall completely silent at night. He avoided phone use during travel afterward and refused winter driving whenever possible. Friends said he never spoke about the storm unless pressed. Lisa transferred off winter shifts permanently and avoids long rural highways during freezing conditions. She declined all further interview requests after the first year passed. She later told a coworker that she sometimes dreams she sees Merrick standing just beyond visible range, waiting at the edge of the trees. The station continued operating and installed a taller canopy and higher intensity lighting the following winter. Emergency lighting and ground markings were also added. No additional disappearances have been reported at that site. Still, the incident remains well known among long-distance drivers during winter months. Every winter, the county quietly reviews the archived file and reaches the same unmoving boundary of evidence. 3 people stopped for gas in a snowstorm, and only 1 person came back. What remains is a narrow window of time where wind erased movement and visibility denied certainty. In that space, a man stepped away from light and never returned. The storm passed by morning, but the question it created has never found shelter from the cold. In this news story, the call was sealed for years under administrative restriction and cited only in coded reports that excluded the public from ever hearing it. It surfaced only after a routine records audit forced an accidental file migration. On Christmas Eve of 2011, emergency dispatch operations in the small rural county were already strained by weather-related accidents and stranded motorists. Snow moved in uneven bands across open farmland and tree-dense back roads. At 7:51 that evening, a call appeared from a prepaid mobile phone with no registered owner attached to the account. Signal analysis placed the caller near a remote county road that cut through wooded property. The caller identified herself as a babysitter named Callie Renner and requested immediate police assistance for suspicious activity. Records later confirmed she was 21 and enrolled at a nearby community college. She said she was watching 2 children at a rented farmhouse while the parents attended a charity event in a neighboring town. The address matched a seasonal rental used only a few times each winter. At the start of the call, her voice sounded steady but strained beneath carefully controlled breathing. She reported persistent knocking at the back door and movement near the tree line behind the house. The dispatcher asked if anyone else was inside the home with her at that moment. Callie confirmed both children were upstairs asleep and that she was alone on the main floor. She added that the property owner had warned about occasional trespassers during hunting season, but claimed they usually left when ignored. The knocking had continued without pause for several minutes. The dispatcher instructed her to secure all doors and windows and then move to a locked room with the children if possible. Callie replied that every visible entrance was already locked. During the call, faint, dull impacts were audible in the background at irregular intervals. Callie described the sound as slow, heavy knocks rather than quick tapping. She moved carefully through the house while staying on the line and checking the front door and side windows one at a time. Snow could be faintly heard crunching outside through the insulated glass. When she reached the rear of the house, her breathing altered and became uneven with rising tension. She said she could see shadows crossing the snow near the tree line beneath a motion light. The dispatcher asked how many figures she could see through the drifting snowfall. Callie hesitated and said she could not tell clearly because the visibility kept shifting. She was told to move away from the back entrance immediately and remain on the phone without interruption. The dispatcher advised that deputies were already being routed toward her location. At 8:02, Callie whispered that the back door handle had begun to move slowly. The metallic rattle was faint but clearly audible across the open line. She said she was afraid of waking the children upstairs with her movement and whispered footsteps. The dispatcher responded that safety was the priority and the children needed to be moved. Callie began walking upstairs while keeping the phone pressed tightly against her ear. Her footsteps were audible on the wooden stairs as light, hurried movements. Halfway up the staircase, the knocking resumed at the back door with greater force. This time, the sound carried clearly through the structure of the house. Callie retrieved the first child from a bedroom and whispered that they were going to play a quiet game together. The child responded with confusion, but did not cry. She then moved to the second bedroom and gathered the younger child as well. Both children were carried into the bathroom at the end of the upstairs hall. The dispatcher instructed her to lock the bathroom door and block the lower gap with towels if possible. Callie complied while breathing in short, shallow bursts of panic. At 8:07, a new sound entered the call from below on the first floor. The back door could be heard opening, followed by slow, measured footsteps on the wooden floor. Callie whispered that someone had entered the house at that moment. The dispatcher urged her to remain silent and to keep both children completely quiet. The footsteps moved through the first floor with no sense of urgency or confusion. Each step paused briefly as if the person was listening for movement above. Callie covered the phone briefly and whispered to the children not to make a sound. One child whimpered softly before she hushed them again with trembling hands. At 8:09, a second set of footsteps entered the house through the same back doorway. The pattern differed slightly and sounded slower and heavier than the first. The dispatcher asked for confirmation, and Callie whispered that there was more than one person inside. Her breathing became shallow and irregular with rising fear. The voices of the intruders were not clearly audible through the floor structure. Only faint murmurs were detected, and their words could not be transcribed later. At 8:12, the footsteps reached the base of the staircase and paused in absolute silence. The first stair creaked faintly under unseen weight. Callie began to sob silently while pressing both children against her chest. The dispatcher repeated that help was close and that she had to stay behind the locked door. The bathroom door handle rattled once at 8:13 with controlled, deliberate force. The sound was sharp and mechanical through the phone speaker. One of the children began to cry louder despite her attempts to quiet them. Callie muffled the sound with her hand while whispering calming words through shaking breath. The handle rattled again with stronger pressure and longer duration this time. Wood fibers could be heard flexing faintly through the microphone. The dispatcher informed Callie that deputies were less than 4 full minutes away from arrival at the property. She acknowledged the update with a faint, whispered response. At 8:15, the handle stopped moving without any spoken exchange. For several seconds, no movement was recorded anywhere inside the structure. Then heavy footsteps descended back down the staircase at an unhurried pace. The call continued as long as the phone connection remained stable. Callie stayed silent while holding the children close against her body. Only her breathing could be heard beneath faint static on the open line. At 8:17, a loud impact sounded on the first floor, followed by the break of glass. The dispatcher asked what had occurred. Callie whispered that the living room window had been broken inward with force. She said she could hear snow being carried across the floor. At 8:19, the intruders moved back toward the staircase with faster movement. Their steps no longer hesitated with careful pacing. The dispatcher urged Callie to remain quiet and stay locked in place without speaking. Distant sirens became faintly audible across the call recording. The footsteps paused on the stair landing once again in heavy silence. A light tapping touched the ceiling above the bathroom and produced a hollow echo. At 8:21, the bathroom door handle was tested again with sustained pressure. Callie pressed her full weight against the door in response. The older child tried to speak before she covered their mouth again. Her breathing became loud through suppressed panic. The handle twisted to its locked limit and held there for several seconds without movement, then the pressure ceased without explanation. Footsteps receded back down the stairs at a measured pace. The dispatcher instructed Callie to remain where she was until officers announced their presence. At 8:24, multiple voices were heard on the call, issuing loud verbal commands. The intruders fled through the shattered living room window. Deputies entered the home less than 1 minute later and secured each room methodically. They found no other individuals inside the structure. Callie and both children were escorted out unharmed through the front entrance. All exterior doors remained locked except for the broken living room window. No suspects were located during the initial perimeter sweep of the surrounding woods. Fresh footprints were visible in the snow but dispersed near the tree line. The parents returned under police escort later the same evening. They confirmed nothing of value had been taken and no prior threats had been received. The official report classified the incident as attempted burglary involving unknown suspects. No clear motive for the delayed intrusion was ever identified. Audio analysts later reviewed the complete call and noted several procedural anomalies. The intruders never rushed and never attempted forced entry into the bathroom. The dispatcher behavior was also quietly flagged for internal review. Certain procedural statements required by policy were missing from the recorded response. Within 36 hours, the entire audio file was sealed under administrative restriction. Callie was advised not to speak publicly about the incident. She relocated out of the county within several weeks of the event and declined all further interviews afterward. Her later whereabouts were kept confidential. For more than a decade, the call existed only as a numeric reference within internal records. No member of the public ever heard the recording. In 2023, a routine digital archive migration error transferred the file into an unrestricted directory. Several clerks accessed it before restrictions were reinstated. One clerk later described the call as the most disturbing audio they had ever encountered in professional work. Another requested immediate reassignment afterward. Independent technical review confirmed the original timestamps and routing data were authentic. The dispatcher identity was verified and unchanged. What disturbed analysts most was a faint sound that appeared repeatedly in the background of the call. It did not match wind or footsteps. The sound resembled low, rhythmic breathing that was not produced by Callie. It appeared to originate near the phone for several intervals. No explanation for that sound was documented in any formal report. The dispatcher never acknowledged it during the incident. The parents sold the farmhouse within the following 2 calendar years. They also requested demolition of the rear structure due to repeated damage claims. Callie never returned to the county after the incident. Her last known address placed her several states away under a married surname. The children grew up with no public awareness of the recorded event. Their identities remain protected under sealed juvenile documentation. To this day, the full call remains classified in official archive systems. Only a partial redacted transcript was released through the records audit. The remainder of the audio was declared exempt under personal safety protection standards. It has never been publicly played. It was never supposed to be released at all. What still unsettles those who reviewed the recording is not the moment officers arrived and secured the house. It is the long stretch of minutes before that when unknown figures moved through the rooms without urgency or clear intent. Outside, the storm masked every sound beneath falling snow and shifting wind. Inside, the phone captured only breath, movement, and the waiting silence between every step. The Christmas lights on the farmhouse porch were still blinking when deputies arrived that night. No one ever confirmed what stood below the staircase during those final moments. And no report ever explained why it returned to the door a second time. In this news story, the reservation record shows their names checked in just before sunset, and the room key was used only once. By morning, the family and their vehicle were gone. The Adler family had been driving through a high mountain pass on the last leg of a winter vacation when weather reports shifted without warning. Everett Adler was 39 and worked in logistics for a regional distributor. His partner, Maris Adler, was 37 and handled remote accounting work for a manufacturing firm. Their daughter, Isla, was 9, and their son, Ren, had just turned 6. They left before dawn from a valley town, planning to cross the pass before heavy snow reached the upper elevations. For the first several hours, the drive remained clear and uneventful. By early afternoon, the sky darkened in uneven sheets of cloud, and wind began pushing snow sideways across the road. Everett slowed the family van as visibility dropped and traffic thinned to almost nothing. Cellular reception faded in long, unpredictable intervals. Road crews were no longer visible along the route by mid-afternoon. By the time the warning signs for seasonal closures appeared through the snow haze, the pass ahead was already being locked down. The last marked exit led toward a small cluster of buildings tucked into the mountainside. At 4:52 in the evening, the Adler family pulled into the parking area of the Apex Ridge Motel. Surveillance footage later confirmed the vehicle entering the lot under steady snowfall. The motel consisted of a single long structure with 12 rooms, an attached office at one end, and a narrow service road looping behind it. Snowbanks pressed against every exterior wall and climbed high along the rear slope. The desk clerk, a man named Rowan Pike, later stated that the family appeared tired but calm. Everett asked only if the road would reopen by morning. Rowan told him it usually did if the storm weakened overnight. Everett paid in cash and signed the register at 5:06. Maris guided the children inside while Everett unloaded 2 small suitcases and a cooler from the van. Room 7 was assigned to them. The door to that room faced the rear service road rather than the main parking lot. That detail would later become one of the most scrutinized elements of the case. Security footage captured Everett carrying the cooler into the room while Maris followed with both children. The door closed and was not recorded opening again that night. According to the motel records, no outgoing phone calls were made from room 7 after check-in, no maintenance requests were logged, no visitors were recorded at any point. By 10 that evening, the storm intensified. Wind forced snow horizontally across the property and built fresh drifts around all parked vehicles. Power remained stable, but visibility dropped to near zero. Rowan closed the front office at 11 after completing his final exterior check. He later stated that room 7 showed no interior light at that time. Overnight, the storm continued to build. Wind-driven snow reshaped the lot repeatedly. By morning, nearly every vehicle was partially buried to the door line. At 6:40 the following morning, Rowan reopened the office to prepare coffee and clear the front walkway. He noticed immediately that the Adler family van was no longer in the parking lot. At first, he assumed Everett had left early to beat the snowfall before it deepened again along the pass. However, the chain barrier across the rear service road remained locked in place. Rowan then checked behind the building and found no fresh tire tracks in the overnight accumulation. Snow lay unbroken behind where the van had been parked. He approached room 7 and knocked after receiving no sound from within. No movement answered through the walls. The door remained locked from the inside. Using the master key at 7:03, Rowan opened the room. The interior appeared untouched by hurried departure. Both suitcases remained neatly stacked near the wall. The cooler sat closed beside the small table. Winter coats and boots were still lined in pairs near the entry. The beds showed partial impressions as though slept in. The bathroom sink contained fresh moisture from recent use. The children's small backpacks were still resting against the far bed. Everett wallet and Maris handbag were both discovered on the nightstand. There was no sign of forced exit through any window. Snow drifted high against the glass outside with no visible disturbance or collapse pattern. Rowan contacted local authorities at 7:12 and reported a missing party under suspicious circumstances. Weather conditions delayed response units for more than 1 full hour. A deputy and a search coordinator arrived just after 8:30. They confirmed that the family vehicle had not passed through either end of the closed pass during the night. Tracking dogs were deployed along the rear service road where the room faced the mountain slope. The wind and continued snowfall quickly destroyed any meaningful scent trail. Search teams expanded outward toward the tree line and downslope drainage channels. No footprints or broken branches were discovered in any direction. Investigators examined the motel surveillance system and found that from 5:16 onward, no motion activation appeared near room 7. The only unusual record showed a brief camera drop at 2:22 in the morning, lasting less than 1 minute. No explanation for the outage was immediately clear. Cellular provider logs revealed that Everett phone last pinged a nearby tower at 11:48 the previous night. Maris phone stopped transmitting just before midnight. Both devices were later confirmed to be powered off within the same narrow time window. Neither phone was ever recovered. The motel guest ledger showed no other arrivals or departures between 10 that night and the next morning. All other parked vehicles remained buried under fresh accumulation. Investigators focused next on the rear window of room 7, which faced the mountain ridge at very close distance. Snow against the glass showed no displacement. Thermal drone sweeps were conducted across the slope and surrounding ravines after weather conditions eased. No human heat signatures were detected anywhere in the search grid. Over the next 3 days, coordinated search parties combed every accessible mile within a wide radius. No clothing, no equipment, and no personal trace of the family surfaced. Everett employers confirmed he had no financial distress and no history of abrupt disappearance. Maris professional contacts described the trip as routine and carefully scheduled. Neither adult had any known ties to the remote area surrounding the motel. The children had no reason to leave the room unattended at night. Investigators noted that the room door locked automatically when closed and required either a key or manual override from inside. The interior override latch remained engaged. This suggested that whoever exited disengaged the lock intentionally from inside. No struggle marks existed on the frame, handle, or threshold. The snow depth outside the rear entrance reached nearly waist height that morning, yet no displacement pattern could be isolated beneath later settling. The van itself was never located on any surrounding mountain roads or Forest Service routes. No abandoned vehicle was reported across neighboring counties. The only unanswered mechanical factor involved the locked chain at the rear service road entrance. It remained intact with no sign of tampering or cutting. Some investigators theorized that the family left briefly during the night before significant snowfall resumed and became stranded elsewhere. However, no vehicle path supported that conclusion. Others proposed that they exited on foot through the rear of the room and lost direction in the storm. Yet no trail of any size was ever found despite extensive sweeps. The one irregularity that resisted simple explanation involved the 222 camera interruption. System diagnostics later confirmed the drop was limited to the rear corridor feed only. Front lot cameras and office interiors recorded continuously during that same interval. No power fluctuation was recorded anywhere on the property. Technical review found no storm-related surge at that precise moment. The system resumed normal recording without manual reset. Rowan was interviewed repeatedly over the following months. His statements regarding the night remained consistent across all sessions. He maintained that no sounds or disturbances reached the office. State investigators later confirmed that Rowan had no criminal record and no financial ties to the victims. No physical or digital evidence linked him to the disappearance. The motel closed permanently the following spring due to declining winter traffic and public unease. The building remains unoccupied and partially buried by seasonal drift. Over the years, isolated hikers reported seeing an abandoned van shaped beneath snow far along a secondary ravine route. Each report was investigated with no physical confirmation found. 5 years after the disappearance, a fragment of children patterned fabric was recovered near an avalanche chute more than 6 miles from the motel. The material could not be conclusively matched. No DNA could be extracted due to environmental degradation. The find was logged and returned to evidence storage without assignment. The Adler family was officially declared missing under hazardous winter conditions. No cause of disappearance was ever assigned. Rowan Pike left the county 2 months after the motel closed. He later refused all media inquiry and declined to testify beyond his original statement. The case remains open with no living witnesses beyond the last person who watched them enter the room. Every winter, the pass still closes without warning when storms rise from the western ridge. The Apex Ridge Motel sign remains half buried in snow. Room 7 has never been rented again. What happened between the locked door and the buried road remains an unverified gap in the record shaped only by absence. All that remains certain is that a family checked into a frozen mountain motel, and they were never seen leaving it in this new story. The recorder captured only one clear sentence before the signal collapsed. That single voice became the final confirmed human sound from inside the lodge. The Arrow Peak Ski Lodge sits above a winding mountain road that closes each winter when snow overtakes the upper switchbacks. It had been shuttered for 8 years after structural damage made it unsafe for guests. In late February of 2019, a small maintenance survey was authorized to assess whether the building could be salvaged. The task fell to a contracted inspections team working for the county. The team consisted of 3 people assigned to document interior damage and retrieve any remaining service records. Their names were later released only in redacted form through investigation summaries. The youngest of the 3 was a man named Keaton Marsh, who was 26 and worked as an audio systems technician. He had been hired to test wiring and salvage recording equipment stored inside the lodge. The other 2 inspectors were stationed outside to evaluate roof stability and snow load distribution. Keaton was the only one cleared to enter the interior that afternoon. Weather conditions at mid-elevation were unstable but within accepted survey limits. Winds remained strong, but snowfall had eased to intermittent flurries. At 2:13 in the afternoon, Keaton entered through a side service door that had been partially cleared of drift. He wore a body camera, a headlamp, and carried a portable audio recorder. The interior of the lodge had been without power for several years. Light entered only through broken window panels and gaps in frost-clouded skylights. Dispatch logs show that Keaton initiated a routine check-in with his team every 10 minutes. His voice was calm and professional during the first 2 updates. At 2:23, he reported significant water damage on the first floor and signs of roof collapse above the main dining area. He continued moving deeper into the structure without incident. At 2:34, the recorder documented the sound of Keaton climbing the central staircase toward the upper guest levels. His breathing was steady and unlabored. The audio feed captured his commentary on sagging beams and frozen plumbing lines. Every observation matched later video review from the body camera. At 2:46, Keaton reached the former guest corridor on the 3rd level where staff housing had once been located. Temperature readings dropped several degrees at that elevation. He commented on the silence inside the building and noted that heavy snow outside had dampened external wind noise almost completely. At 2:51, the recorder picked up a faint background sound that was not initially identified by analysts. It resembled distant airflow or low movement within walls. Keaton acknowledged the noise and attributed it to shifting ice inside the structure. He continued forward along the corridor toward a storage area marked on older floor plans. At 2:58, he reported that a door at the end of the hall was standing ajar despite exterior lock records showing all units sealed at closure. He approached with caution and used his headlamp to sweep the interior. The body camera later showed stacked furniture and collapsed shelving within the room. At 3:02, the recorder captured Keaton stating that something was wrong with the air inside the room. His voice lowered without clear explanation. He paused his movement and adjusted his respirator mask while testing airflow near the wall vents. No hazardous gas readings appeared on his handheld monitor. The background sound grew slightly louder during that interval. Analysts later isolated it as rhythmic in nature rather than continuous mechanical noise. At 3:05, Keaton's voice changed in tone as he stated that he believed he heard someone speaking from deeper within the lodge. His outside team responded that no one else was authorized on site and no additional contractors were present that day. Keaton advanced several steps back into the corridor and called out to identify any unauthorized person inside the structure. No spoken response was captured on the recorder. Only the continuing low sound remained beneath his voice. At 3:07, Keaton stated that the sound appeared to be coming from below the floor near the ski locker access. The ski locker wing had suffered partial collapse during a previous winter and was considered unstable. Keaton had not been assigned to enter that area. Despite this, he descended a short auxiliary stairwell that connected the 3rd floor to the lower locker level. The body camera feed showed heavy frost along railing surfaces and thick ice on concrete walls. His footing became cautious and deliberate. At 3:11, Keaton reported visual confirmation of movement shadows near the far end of the locker hall. His breathing became audible through the mask. He called out again with his first name and asked for verbal confirmation from anyone inside. The question echoed empty through the corridor. The rhythmic background sound increased in volume and layered over his footsteps. Analysts later described it as resembling distant speech patterns without discernible words. At 3:13, Keaton turned toward a locker room door that stood partially open beneath a collapsed beam. The recorder captured him stating that he was approaching the source of the sound to determine mechanical failure. The body camera view shifted rapidly as his headlamp beam swept across wet concrete and broken locker doors. At 3:14, the recorder captured a second voice for the first time. It was faint, unsteady, and distorted by distance. The words were largely obscured by static, but the presence of another human voice was confirmed by multiple forensic audio technicians. Keaton reacted immediately and asked who was there. His voice showed tension but remained controlled. The unknown voice responded again with a longer phrase that could not be fully transcribed. Only 2 words were isolated with moderate confidence. Those 2 words were help and cold. At 3:15, Keaton stated clearly that he was calling for medical support. He began backing away from the locker room entrance while maintaining visual contact. The distant voice continued speaking in fragmented bursts beneath the recorder distortion. Analysts later documented at least 5 separate utterances. Keaton attempted to approach again after his initial retreat, stating that the person might be injured and unable to move. At 3:16, the body camera feed shook violently as the floor beneath the locker room entrance shifted. A heavy impact sound followed, and debris collapsed partially into the corridor. Visibility dropped in a sudden cloud of ice dust. Keaton shouted and moved forward again despite audible warnings from his outside team transmitted through his headset. At 3:17, the recorder captured his final clear sentence. "It sounds like you are trapped. I am coming closer." Immediately following that sentence, the audio feed was overwhelmed by a sudden roar of collapsing material and rushing air pressure. The recorder continued capturing sound for 13 more seconds. No additional speech was detected after that point. At 3:18, the signal terminated abruptly. The body camera feed cut to static. Outside monitoring logs show the outside team attempted contact repeatedly with no response. Emergency rescue protocols were initiated within minutes. Due to avalanche risk and interior collapse danger, rescue entry was delayed until the following morning. At first light, search personnel entered through the same side service door Keaton had used. They located his recorder and body camera near the auxiliary stairwell. Keaton himself was found beneath fallen debris near the entrance to the locker wing. He was deceased at the scene due to blunt force trauma. Search crews found no second individual inside the lodge. No trapped person was located in any accessible area. Structural engineers later confirmed that the locker wing collapse occurred during Keaton's approach, likely triggered by internal ice shift. What could not be explained was the verified presence of a second human voice on the audio recording. Extensive review confirmed that no other responders entered the building prior to Keaton, and no radio bleed-through matched the captured sound. The voice did not match any member of the survey team. It also did not match archived radio traffic from emergency channels. Audio specialists filtered out wind noise, equipment feedback, and structural creak sounds. The rhythmic quality of the voice remained intact through every filter. Investigators considered the possibility of delayed sound reflection from earlier recordings left within the lodge. No functioning playback devices were discovered on site. The lodge had once contained public announcement systems used during guest seasons. All amplifier units were found disconnected and without power source. Battery-powered devices were recovered from storage rooms, but all were non-functional at the time of inspection. Records indicated that during the lodge closure 8 years earlier, a night security guard had died during an interior fire suppression failure. That incident occurred on a lower level several floors below the locker wing. No audio recording from that event existed. The investigation officially concluded that Keaton perished during a structural collapse caused by accumulated ice load failure. The presence of the voice was documented as unexplained ambient noise with no verified human source. The county sealed the full audio record under safety review, releasing only a partial transcript. Several technicians who reviewed the unedited audio reportedly requested removal from similar assignments afterward. The Arrow Peak Ski Lodge remains abandoned. No further interior surveys have been authorized since the incident. Each winter, the building continues to absorb snow and ice without maintenance. Access roads remain blocked after the first major storm. The final recording remains stored in evidence under restricted access. Its last confirmed words are preserved in official documentation. Help, cold, No one has ever determined who spoke them, or how a voice could remain inside a building where no living person was ever found. In this news story, the shortcut was supposed to save him 40 minutes. By nightfall, it became the last confirmed place he was ever seen. Darius Klein was 31 and worked late shifts as a facilities technician for a medical supply warehouse on the edge of a mid-sized mountain town. He was known among co-workers for never missing a shift and for taking the same route home every night without variation. His reliability was routine, almost ritual, and he rarely made spontaneous decisions without careful thought. On the evening of January 12th in 2020, a fast-moving winter system swept across the region earlier than forecast. Snow began falling in heavy wet sheets just after sunset, coating roads before plow crews could fully mobilize. Wind followed soon after, lifting loose powder and driving it sideways across open stretches of highway. Darius clocked out at 6:17 and walked alone to his dark blue pickup in the employee lot. Co-workers later said he mentioned wanting to beat the storm before it worsened in the higher elevations. He sent a short text to a family member saying he was heading home and might lose signal past the ridge. Under normal conditions, his drive home took just under an hour along the main highway loop. That route stayed plowed, but added distance through a broad valley before climbing back toward his neighborhood. There was another way, known locally as the Timbercut Road. It reduced the drive by nearly 40 minutes, but climbed sharply through dense forest and narrow switchbacks. The road was officially listed as seasonal, with limited winter maintenance and long stretches without guardrails or lighting. Darius had used it twice before during light snowfall and made it through both times without incident. Those previous drives likely influenced the decision he made that night. At 6:36 that evening, his phone connected to a cell tower near the Timbercut entrance. That was the last confirmed data ping tied to his device. After that moment, no further network activity would ever register. Traffic cameras at the highway junction captured his truck turning off the main route at 6:41. Snowfall had intensified at that point, and visibility had already begun to drop to less than a quarter mile. What happened after that turn is reconstructed only through terrain mapping, weather logs, vehicle diagnostics, and later witness statements. No direct visual record exists of his movements beyond that first turn. The Timbercut Road climbed quickly into higher elevation and narrow corridor forest. Tall pines formed heavy walls on both sides that trapped drifting snow and limited wind escape. The roadway narrowed to two tight lanes with no center barrier. Within 20 minutes of that turnoff, snowfall rates doubled. Wind pushed fresh accumulations sideways across the roadway faster than any plow could reach it. Drifts began forming unevenly along blind bends and downhill slopes. At 7:03, a local resident named Harlan Metz called the county line to report a stranded vehicle partially blocking the Timbercut Road near mile marker 6. He described a pickup angled into a snowbank with its hazard lights flashing. Harlan said he slowed but could not safely stop because the shoulder dropped steeply into trees on the downhill side. He did not see a person near the truck but assumed the driver had already gone for help. Response crews were delayed by worsening conditions and another rollover accident on the highway loop. By the time a deputy was dispatched toward the Timbercut area, nearly 40 minutes had passed since Harlan's call. At 7:48, Deputy Elson reached the reported location. The pickup was still present where Harlan had described it, but the hazard lights were no longer flashing. Snow had built up along the hood and wheel wells. The engine was off, and the driver door stood open several inches. Snow had already drifted partway into the cab. No person was present inside or directly around the vehicle. A set of glove prints were visible on the edge of the door, but no clear footprint trail extended away from the truck. Fresh accumulation had already softened most surface detail. Inside the cab, Darius' wallet, phone mount, and thermos were still in place. His jacket and insulated work coat were missing. A headlamp usually kept in the glove box was not recovered. Fresh snowfall had already filled most track impressions. Only a single partial boot print could be identified near the rear tire on the downhill side of the road. Deputy Elson attempted to follow the faint impression toward the tree line. After less than 10 yards, the trail vanished completely beneath new accumulation and wind-driven drift. At 8:12, a formal search was initiated and road closures were ordered on both ends of the timber cut route. Additional deputies and county rescue volunteers were requested. Thermal scanning units were deployed along the corridor once visibility stabilized enough for safe movement. No heat signatures consistent with a living person were detected within the initial grid. By midnight, snowfall rates and wind gusts made continued searching unsafe. Operations were suspended until morning under cold exposure protocol. When teams returned at first light, nearly 15 inches of new snow covered the entire area where the truck had been found. The road itself was barely distinguishable from the surrounding forest floor. Searchers worked outward in expanding grids along both sides of the road. The forest sloped steeply with hidden ravines and deep drifts forming between fallen logs and exposed roots. No trail of any kind was recovered. No clothing, no dropped tools, no disturbance pattern that could confirm any direction of travel. Investigators later confirmed that Darris' phone battery still held charge when the truck was found. The device was locked but powered off manually rather than shut down by battery loss. Vehicle diagnostics showed no mechanical failure that would have forced him to stop. The fuel tank was half full and no impact damage was recorded. Tire tracks showed he had not attempted aggressive turning or reversing before stopping. Weather logs showed that wind chill values at that elevation dropped below -10 within 30 minutes of his last confirmed movement. Exposed skin could develop frost injury in minutes under those conditions. Hypothermia was listed as the primary environmental risk factor. However, no evidence of collapse, shelter building, or fire attempt was documented anywhere in the search grid. Drone surveys conducted 3 days later after snowfall settled revealed no exposed gear or fabric visible from above. Tree canopy and uneven drifts concealed much of the ground surface. Canine units returned repeatedly over several weeks whenever conditions permitted. Each attempt ended without a confirmed scent trail. Wind and snow were determined to be the primary reason for scent loss. The single witness, Harlan Metz, was re-interviewed multiple times. His account remained consistent. He stated that when he passed, the driver door was already open, but he saw no person nearby. Harlan said he slowed briefly, but could not see anyone along the shoulder or between the trees. He assumed the driver had left moments earlier to find help. Roadside phone records revealed no outgoing calls from Darris after he turned on to the timber cut route. No emergency call was ever placed from his device. Search radius expanded into deeper forest ravines and downslope river channels as spring approached. Snowmelt exposed fallen branches, animal tracks, and runoff debris, but no human trace. Months later, a logging crew reported finding fragments of plastic matching a pickup taillight deep within a drainage basin nearly 2 miles from the road. Forensic comparison could not conclusively match the fragments to Darris' vehicle, though size and color were consistent. No metal debris, paint transfer, or frame material was found nearby. 1 year later, a hiker located a single work glove partially buried beneath regrown underbrush west of the timber cut corridor. The glove matched the brand issued by Darris' employer. It could not be uniquely tied to him due to lack of serial marking and common regional distribution of the same model. No other personal property was found within several hundred yards of that location. The official case classification remained missing under hazardous winter exposure with probable accidental cause undetermined. Theories varied widely among investigators. Some believed Darris left the road seeking help and was overcome by cold before reaching shelter, later becoming concealed by seasonal snow and terrain movement. Others suggested he slipped into an unseen ravine near the road edge and was buried beyond recoverable depth by cascading drift and spring runoff. A minority theory proposed that he accepted a ride from an unknown motorist who never came forward. No other traffic was confirmed on the corridor during the critical window. What complicates the case is the condition of the truck when it was found. The driver door was open but not forced. The hazard lights had been activated and later shut off. The engine showed signs of having cooled naturally rather than being abruptly disabled or flooded. That suggests Darris intended to return to the vehicle, yet no track pattern consistent with short-range movement was ever preserved beneath the rapid accumulation rate. No blood, No fabric tears, and no disturbance consistent with animal predation was detected anywhere in the search zone. His family traveled from out of state to participate in early search coordination. They remained in the town for weeks as weather allowed limited additional sweeps. They described Darris as cautious and prepared in outdoor conditions. He carried emergency supplies in his truck during winter months and rarely traveled without notifying someone of his route. His family stated he would never abandon his vehicle without strong reason. Investigators reviewed his financial records and communications. No indications of personal crisis, debt, or voluntary disappearance were found. Workplace supervisors confirmed his attendance record, and future shift schedules showed no indication he planned time away. The Timbercut Road was officially closed permanently the following winter due to repeated weather incidents and safety concerns. A steel warning barrier now blocks the original access point. His family continues to visit the general area yearly during the safest season when snow has fully cleared and foliage visibility is highest. No trace has ever emerged that confirms what direction he walked or how far he may have gone. The mountain eventually reclaimed every mark that night left behind. What remains on record is only this. A man took a winter shortcut to save time, and he never made it home. In this news story, the camera kept recording long after the roads closed, and what it captured in the final hours left investigators with questions that were never fully answered. The Pine Ridge Rest Stop sits along a rural highway that cuts across an open plateau before climbing into forested highlands. It serves long-haul drivers and winter travelers caught between towns when storms move faster than forecasts predict. On the night of February 9th in 2018, a fast-forming blizzard overtook the region with little advance warning. Wind rose first in powerful, erratic bursts, then heavy snow followed in dense, shifting bands that erased visibility within minutes. By 8 in the evening, highway patrol shut down traffic in both directions. Several vehicles were already parked at the rest stop when the closure was announced over emergency broadcast. Among them was a beige crossover driven by a man named Nolan Drisk, who was 42 and worked as a regional appliance delivery contractor. He had left a nearby city late that afternoon and was caught by the sudden closure. 2 long-haul tractor-trailers were also parked near the rear lot, angled toward the wind. A compact sedan occupied the far corner near the restroom building with no visible interior movement. The rest stop itself was unstaffed overnight as usual. Lighting was maintained by automated power tied to backup generators and monitored only by remote security cameras owned by the State Transport Authority. At 8:12, Nolan was recorded exiting his vehicle and entering the restroom building to wait out the storm. He carried a small travel bag and a metal thermos. The trucks remained idling intermittently as their drivers slept in rotating cycles for heat. The sedan remained dark with no confirmed occupant movement. By 9:30, snow depth around the lot reached nearly knee height in drifting waves. Wind carved heavy ridges across the asphalt, making the original lanes indistinguishable. Remote operators checked the camera feeds periodically due to the active highway closure protocol. Nothing unusual appeared during the first several hours besides worsening whiteout conditions. At 11:47, motion sensors triggered near the rear tree line beyond the rest stop perimeter fence. The camera angle showed only blowing snow and deep darkness beyond the lights. The alert was marked as weather interference and dismissed at that time. No vehicles moved in the lot and no doors opened. At 12:05, Nolan briefly exited the restroom building and returned to his vehicle. He retrieved a heavier coat and a spare battery pack from the back seat and re-entered the building. That was the last confirmed moment Nolan was seen in clear condition on any camera. Shortly after midnight, the compact sedan in the far corner showed a brief interior light flicker across several frames. No door movement was visible. At 12:22, the same rear tree line motion sensor activated again. This time, the camera captured a tall, dark shape moving slowly just beyond the fence line. The image resolution was poor due to blowing snow and lens frost. Operators later described the shape as upright and narrow, with no visible headlights or reflective markers. The figure moved parallel to the fence for several seconds and then vanished into drifting shadow. No vehicle lights followed it. No further motion alerts triggered for nearly an hour. At 1:17, the restroom building exterior camera recorded Nolan stepping into the doorway briefly and looking outward into the storm. He did not exit past the threshold. He retreated inside within seconds as wind gusts intensified. That moment became the final confirmed movement from Nolan as a visible person. At 1:34, the rear lot camera again captured movement near the fence. The tall, dark shape reappeared closer to the property than before. This time it crossed fully into the open lot through a narrow drift gap beneath the fence rail. No break or bending of the metal was visible in later inspection. The shape moved slowly across the snow toward the restroom building. It did not cast a distinct headlight shadow, nor reflect the overhead pole lights. Frame-by-frame analysis later showed its outline remained consistent despite heavy snow interference. No visible leg stride or arm swing could be clearly isolated. At 1:41, the exterior camera recorded the restroom door pushing inward. Nolan did not exit at that time. Investigators later confirmed that the restroom door had no automatic actuator and could only open from inside or by physical force from outside. No human silhouette appeared in the doorway when the door moved. Snow did not visibly enter the building during that opening. The door slowly closed again after several seconds. Nolan was not seen afterward. At 1:48, the sedan interior light activated again. This time, the driver door opened and closed within fewer than 10 seconds. No figure was clearly visible exiting or entering the sedan due to angle and snowfall. At 2:02, one of the truck drivers emerged briefly to check his trailer lines. He looked toward the restroom building but did not approach it. He later stated he felt the wind pressure change suddenly and returned to his cab without seeing another person in the lot. At 2:15, the rear tree line camera captured the dark, upright shape once more. It stood stationary near the edge of the lot facing the restroom building. Snow obscured fine detail, but the silhouette appeared taller than any recorded person at the site, including Nolan. At 2:19, the restroom interior camera feed abruptly terminated. Power to the exterior cameras remained active and uninterrupted. Technicians later confirmed no grid outage or generator fluctuation occurred at that time. Only the interior feed froze. At 2:23, the exterior building camera showed the door opening once more. Again, no person was visible entering or exiting. Minutes later, both long-haul truck engines shut down almost simultaneously as drivers conserved fuel through the coldest hours before dawn. At 3:06, the sedan headlights turned on briefly, then went dark again. No engine ignition followed, and no movement accompanied the light activation. Weather logs show that wind chill at the site during this period dropped below -15 with sustained gusts exceeding 40 miles per hour. Snowfall did not relent until shortly after sunrise. No further movement was recorded until morning. At 6:45, Highway Patrol began clearing access routes after winds eased slightly. A first unit reached the rest stop at 7:12. Officers immediately noticed Nolan's vehicle still parked near the front with the driver door ajar. Snow had drifted halfway into the cabin. Inside the restroom building, Nolan was not located in any stall. His travel bag remained on the sink counter. His thermos was still warm to the touch, according to first responder notes. His heavier coat was missing. The two truck drivers were awakened and accounted for in their cabs. Both denied exiting during the overnight period, except for the earlier trailer inspection. The sedan driver was found unresponsive in the back seat under heavy blankets. Emergency crews confirmed an exposure-related death consistent with hypothermia after presumed engine failure. Records later identified the sedan occupant as a woman traveling alone between towns. Mechanical inspection showed her battery had failed during the storm. No physical damage was found on her vehicle, indicating external interference. The most troubling discovery came from a maintenance sweep of the snow near the restroom entrance. A single set of shallow impressions led from the tree-lined fence toward the building door. The impressions were elongated and irregular and did not match standard footwear. No return prints were found leading back toward the fence. No human boot pattern in the regional database matched the shape. The impression stopped directly at the threshold of the restroom door. Inside the building, no matching wet tracks or melt patterns extended beyond the entry. When interior power was restored later that morning, the frozen camera feed resumed automatically without manual reset. The final recorded interior audio captured only one distorted segment. 5 seconds of faint, slow breathing. No human voice. No foot movement. Only steady, rhythmic air sound not matching Nolan respiratory pattern from earlier footage. Nolan Drisk was never located. Extended ground search operations found no trace of him in surrounding fields or nearby ravines, despite canine deployment and aerial sweeps. No vehicle departed the rest stop during the closure window confirmed by patrol checkpoints. The fence line remained intact, with no breach discovered anywhere along its span. The impressions near the door faded as snow melted later that day, but were photographed, measured, and documented by patrol. Those photographs were later classified for internal review and never released publicly. The Transport Authority replaced the entire camera system 3 months later with updated equipment and encrypted storage. The original server drive was archived under restricted access for evidentiary preservation. Several technicians involved in the footage review later transferred out of remote monitoring roles within the year. The case was officially recorded as a missing person under extreme winter conditions with no confirmed direction of travel. No official explanation was offered for the unexplained door movement or the missing interior audio interruption. The rest stop remains operational today. But during heavy winter storms, patrol units now avoid leaving the location unoccupied overnight. Drivers who shelter there quietly report hearing faint movement near the fence after midnight when wind drops. Security logs continue to record occasional motion triggers at the tree line during blizzards. Each time, the feed shows only drifting white and shadow. Nothing else is ever clearly visible, except for that one night, when the camera recorded something crossing the snow and a man walking inside, and only one of them ever appeared again. In this new story, the dispatcher froze when the caller said his name. It was the same voice she had listened for during a search that ended 3 years earlier with no body found. On a cold evening in early March of 2023, calls moved slowly through the county emergency center as steady snow fell across rural back roads. Most reports involved stalled vehicles, downed lines, and minor slide-offs along untreated highways. At 9:18 that night, a call appeared on a shaky open line with unstable signal quality. The caller did not provide an address or reference a nearby landmark. He only asked for help and said he was lost. The dispatcher who answered was Mara Vance, age 34, with 9 years of emergency call experience. She worked the late shift and was known for calm handling of high-stress cases. She also had an unusually strong memory for voices. The caller stated his name as Luke Brenner. The moment the name reached her headphones, Mara felt a sudden tightening in her chest and a quiet drop of silence in the room around her. Luke Brenner was the name of a man reported missing in the same county 3 years earlier during a winter search effort that ended without recovery. His disappearance had consumed weeks of coordinated effort across multiple agencies. The file was one Mara had personally handled. She had taken Luke's final confirmed phone call before his signal disappeared in the mountains that winter night. The voice on the line now matched the cadence and phrasing she remembered. Even the slight hesitation between breaths was identical. Mara asked the caller to repeat his name. He did so immediately without confusion or resistance. His speech pattern matched archived recordings that she had reviewed dozens of times during training refreshers. There was no slurring, no distortion of tone that would suggest impersonation. Luke Brenner had been 27 at the time of his disappearance. He worked seasonal construction and maintenance on rural road projects. On the night he vanished, he had been driving toward a closed forest access road during a sudden snowstorm. His vehicle had later been found abandoned near a frozen creek crossing. The driver door stood open, the engine was cold, no foot tracks were recovered. No personal items were ever located beyond what remained inside the truck. For 3 years, the case remained open with no physical recovery and no confirmed direction of travel. Now his voice was on Mara's call screen again. Mara asked Luke where he was calling from. He said he did not know. She asked if he could see any roads, buildings, or lights. He described only trees, a downward slope, and snow that never seemed to stop falling. He said his phone battery was low, but the cold was keeping it alive. The statement made no technical sense, but it was delivered without confusion. Mara asked how he had a phone after being missing for 3 years. Luke paused for several seconds before answering. He said he had never stopped walking. He said he believed he had only been gone for a few hours. Mara quietly raised her hand to signal her supervisor without breaking the flow of the call. The supervisor put on a listening headset and began recording independently. Mara asked Luke if he remembered the date. He said it was still the same night he went missing. Mara told him it was now 3 years later. The caller fell completely silent for several seconds. When he spoke again, his voice trembled faintly but did not sound disoriented. He said that could not be right because he had never seen the sun rise. Mara asked him what he could see around him at that moment. Luke described snow-packed trees that leaned inward as if sealing the path. He said the ground sloped downward but never reached flat land. He said he could still hear the creek he had crossed the night he disappeared, even though he could no longer see water or ice. Mara pulled up the original incident map on her secondary monitor. Luke had last been heard near a narrow creek crossing exactly as he was now describing. She asked Luke if he was injured. He said his feet no longer felt cold and his hands no longer felt heavy. She asked if he could see his hands. He said he could, but they did not look the way he remembered. Mara asked him to describe what was different. He said they no longer left prints in the snow when he touched the ground. Signal specialists attempted triangulation in the background without alerting the caller. The system failed to locate a stable origin. The signal did not strengthen when Luke stopped walking. It also did not weaken as distance processing routines adjusted for terrain. The call behaved unlike any normal mobile transmission. Mara asked Luke to stop moving. He said he could not. He said the path moved even when he stood still. Mara asked if anyone else was with him. Luke said he could hear others farther into the trees. He said they never answered in full sentences. He said they sounded like people who had forgotten how to talk. Background noise analysis ran in real time. The sound did not match wind, snow movement, animal calls, or recognizable forest ambience. The audio carried no echo. It sounded enclosed, despite Luke repeatedly stating he was outdoors. Mara asked him to describe any landmarks. Luke said there were wooden posts buried in the snow with no signs attached. He said each post leaned inward more sharply than the last, as though marking a corridor that narrowed. Mara compared this with search grid records from 3 years earlier. No such structures existed in the documented area. Mara asked Luke if he could see the sky. He said it was only white and never changed. She asked if it was snowing. He said the snow never landed on him anymore. At 9:34, the supervisor requested a secondary voice confirmation. Another dispatcher spoke briefly to Luke. He responded immediately to both voices without confusion or delay. The transition caused no latency or distortion in the call stream. The phone battery metadata remained static. It did not drop even after extended active time. Mara asked Luke to activate his phone camera. He said there was no option to do that anymore. Mara then asked him to describe what he had done in the hours after he vanished 3 years earlier. Luke said he followed the sound of running water until it stopped sounding like water. He said the sound became like breathing. He said that was the moment he realized the forest no longer had direction. Mara felt her hands trembling but kept her voice steady and slow. She asked Luke if he remembered talking to her the night he went missing. He said he remembered only her voice. He said she was the last person who sounded real. At 9:41, the call distorted suddenly and dropped to near silence for several seconds. When the audio returned, Luke's voice sounded farther away but remained intelligible. He said something had noticed the light from his phone. Mara asked what he meant. Luke said when the screen turned on, the forest behind him moved. Mara asked him to turn the phone off to preserve battery. Luke said he had tried that before and it made things come closer. Mara asked if he could hear anything approaching. Luke said he heard many feet, but none of them touched the ground. The supervisor ordered emergency field deployment to the original disappearance site despite the absence of live coordinates. Multiple units were redirected to the creek area where Luke's vehicle had been located 3 years earlier. At 9:48, Luke's voice weakened and developed a hollow echo. The background sound increased in volume like distant wind passing through a long tunnel. Luke said the trees were no longer beside him. He said they were forming a wall behind him now. Mara asked him to turn around. He said there was no behind anymore. Mara asked Luke if he was afraid. He said fear left him long ago. He said he was tired of walking in place. At 9:52, field units reported reaching the original creek crossing. Conditions matched archived photographs with heavy snow and frozen water flow. No footprints were found. No recent disturbance patterns appeared near the road. At the same moment, Luke began speaking rapidly on the line. He said the sound of sirens was hurting the forest. Mara immediately ordered all field units to shut down sirens. They complied without question. The background noise on the call changed instantly, as if something had drawn a long breath and released it. Luke then said something was standing where the path had been. Mara asked him what it looked like. He said he could not describe it because it did not stay in one shape long enough. He said it was made of spacing rather than matter. At 10:01, the call signal reached maximum distortion. Audio artifacts surged across multiple frequency bands. Luke's voice came through clearly one final time. He said he could finally see the road again. Mara told him to stay exactly where he was and to keep the phone active. Luke said the road was not in front of him. He said it was opening behind him. At 10:03, the call ended without disconnect tone. There was no automatic release signal. The line simply went dead. At the same minute, field units at the creek reported a sudden burst of radio interference lasting several seconds. No person was located at the site. No phone was recovered. The forest showed no new disturbances. Mara remained on shift until morning without taking another call. She did not remove her headset. She did not speak unless spoken to. The next day, supervisors reviewed the archived audio with multiple outside analysts. Voice comparison testing confirmed with near certainty that the caller matched Luke Brenner's original recordings from 3 years earlier. The signal routing did not originate from any known tower within the county. It did not originate from surrounding counties either. The call path could not be mapped through standard network tracing. The incident was recorded under restricted case status. Luke Brenner remains listed as missing. The case was never reclassified. Mara transferred out of emergency dispatch 6 months later. She later told one close coworker that when the line went dead, she did not hear a disconnect tone. She heard footsteps stop, and for the first time in 3 years, so did the forest. In this news story, the county keeps it on the maps all year, school buses detour around it in winter, freight companies flag it in red. Yet every year, when the first heavy snows arrive, the road vanishes so completely beneath drifting white that it might as well never have existed. And almost every year, someone disappears with it. Locals call it Hollow Ridge Road. In summer, it is a narrow gravel artery that cuts through dense high forest between two remote valleys. It curls along a spine of land shaped by erosion and exposed bedrock, with steep drop-offs to the south and a rising timber wall to the north. The surface is rough but navigable. Logging trucks use it during dry months. Hunters take it into the upper basin. Satellite navigation systems list it as a legitimate thoroughfare. In winter, it becomes something else entirely. Drifts bury the guard posts. Wind scours the surface until the road blends seamlessly into the surrounding snowpack. There are no landmarks, no edges, no contrast. The road does not simply close. It goes silent, erased from the physical world beneath moving white. The first officially recorded disappearance happened more than 2 decades ago. In early December of 1999, a delivery driver named Harold Metz failed to arrive at the Eastern Valley Depot after taking Hollow Ridge as a shortcut during an early season storm. The weather forecast that day had predicted light accumulation. Instead, winds from the north accelerated through the corridor and dumped nearly 2 feet of snow in under 4 hours. Harold's truck was found 3 days later during a limited plow operation. It sat nose-angled gently into a drift as though he had pulled over deliberately. The engine was cold, the cab interior was intact, the keys were still in the ignition. Harold himself was never located. Search teams assumed he had exited the vehicle for help and collapsed from hypothermia before being buried, but no tracks were ever recovered, no disturbance of snow radiated away from the truck. The snow around it was unbroken, as smooth as if it had fallen onto an empty shape. At the time, the disappearance was written off as a tragic but explainable winter exposure case. Then it happened again, and again. Since that first incident, at least 9 more people have vanished along the same stretch. Different ages, different genders, different vehicles, different points in the winter season. The pattern never changes. The road is always passable when they enter it, and completely erased by morning. In every case, a vehicle remains. The person does not. In the most recent disappearance before the official closure, a man named Randall Pike left his sister's home just before dusk in late November of 2022. He planned to take Hollow Ridge to save nearly an hour on his return trip to the Western Valley. Snow had started falling lightly, but no formal closure had been issued. Plow logs from both ends of the corridor indicated routine clearing earlier that afternoon. Traffic cameras showed Randall's pickup turning onto Hollow Ridge at 5:47 in the evening. He was alone in the vehicle. Headlights were visible for only a few seconds before blowing snow swallowed the image. By 8 the next morning, a state plow crew reached the western entrance of Hollow Ridge to clear early accumulation. Less than half a mile in, they saw the outline of Randall's truck buried up to the windows. Only the upper edge of the cab and mirrors were visible above the drift. The engine was cold. The driver door was closed. The interior dome light was still on. Randall was not inside. There were no footprints around the vehicle. Not leading away. Not returning. Just smooth, wind-flattened snow in every direction. Search teams combed the surrounding forest for 6 days. Avalanche specialists probed slide paths. Dogs were deployed repeatedly. Thermal drones swept the corridor at low altitude. No clothing, no blood. No sign that Randall had ever exited the truck. His phone was later located beneath the passenger seat. The battery was dead. There were no emergency calls in the log, no final texts, no recorded change in signal strength after he entered the road. Older residents were not surprised. They had seen this before. One winter earlier, a nursing assistant named Celia Morris vanished after leaving a night shift at the Valley Clinic. Her compact car was found facing uphill on Hollow Ridge, hazard lights activated, fuel tank nearly full, her purse lay on the driver's seat, her coat was still on the back of the chair. She was never found. The year before that, 2 men within the same season, different storms, same result. Vehicles remain, people do not. Investigators initially blamed exposure, disorientation, hidden ravines, and avalanche pockets. But none of the cases ever produced the physical evidence those explanations require. No trails, no remains, no scattered personal items, no drag marks, not even a confirmed direction of travel. What troubled search coordinators most was the condition of the snow around the vehicles. In every case, the snow showed no disturbance consistent with a person exiting and walking away. Even in storms that dropped more than a foot of accumulation, the immediate area around the doors should have shown compression or collapse patterns. Instead, the snowpack appeared uniform, as though the space where the person should have stood was gently filled without disturbance. A climatologist from the State University later noted something unusual about Hollow Ridge's geography. The road runs through a shallow wind corridor formed by 2 opposing slopes. During storms, wind speed accelerates sharply within that narrow channel, scouring and redepositing snow at abnormal rates. This phenomenon could explain how the road disappeared so quickly. It could not explain the absence of footprints beneath newly accumulated layers. In several cases, cameras installed at either end of the road confirmed vehicles entering during snowfall. None ever recorded anyone exiting on foot. And no vehicle was ever recorded leaving, only entering. Then, nothing. In 2019, the county installed temporary motion-activated cameras along a 2-mile section considered the highest risk. The plan was to capture wildlife movement, deter seasonal trespassers, and provide early warning for stranded motorists. That winter, the cameras recorded something the county did not anticipate. On 3 separate nights, motion alerts triggered after midnight during heavy storms. The footage showed what first appeared to be drifting snow moving against the wind pattern. Then, for several seconds at a time, the snow reversed direction around a specific shape. Not an animal, not a person, just a tall vertical absence where snow did not pass through. The snow flowed around it as though circling a narrow pillar of empty space. In every instance, the camera feed cut out within seconds of the anomaly appearing. Power was never disrupted elsewhere on the grid. Those recordings were quietly archived and never released to the public. The following winter, a volunteer rescue worker named Thomas Elridge attempted to traverse Hollow Ridge on foot during a controlled test operation. The goal was to understand wind behavior and snow displacement patterns within the corridor. Thomas was tethered to a heavy anchor vehicle at the western entrance and maintained constant radio contact. He wore full cold weather gear and carried a locator beacon. Weather monitors tracked wind speed and barometric pressure in real time. At only 200 yards in, Thomas reported that the wind sound had changed. He said it no longer sounded like air. He said it sounded like movement. Seconds later, his radio filled with static. The safety line went slack. When the team pulled the tether back, it was intact. Thomas was gone. No sign of breakage. No torn fiber. No drag marks. The test was never repeated. After Thomas Elridge vanished, the county permanently closed Hollow Ridge Road. Steel barriers were installed at both entrances, warning signs were placed every quarter mile on connecting routes, GPS providers were formally notified, automated alerts were added to mapping software. Despite this, people still attempt to use it. Some claim navigation systems reroute them there during storms. Others say visibility collapses so fast they only realize where they are after the barriers are already behind them. In every modern disappearance, authorities receive the same sequence of data. A vehicle enters the road. The storm intensifies. By morning, the road is gone, and so is the driver. No survivors have ever been found. The surrounding valleys have been searched repeatedly over the years. Remote sensing surveys, ground-penetrating radar, drainage excavation, avalanche chute mapping. Nothing has ever surfaced. Not a single confirmed human trace. Residents near Hollow Ridge avoid the area once the first heavy snow falls. They secure loose structures, they shut livestock into winter barns, they close their shutters early, and they do not go outside once the corridor wind begins to howl. Because on certain nights, beneath the wind, some of them report hearing engines. Not approaching. Not departing. Just idling. Deep under the snow. The sound does not echo. It does not rise or fade with gusts. It remains steady, as though coming from something buried far deeper than any vehicle could reach. Years after the closure, the county received an unexpected discovery during a spring runoff survey. A low-altitude drone, mapping meltwater patterns near the upper basin, detected a hollow beneath the snowpack that should not have existed according to subsurface charts. When melt cleared the area weeks later, crews found the rusted outline of a vehicle roof emerging from a depression nearly 15 feet below the former road surface. The vehicle was identified as Harold Metz's delivery truck. It was located more than a mile downhill from where it had originally been found. There was no ravine connecting the two positions. No slide path. No debris trail. The metal showed no crushing consistent with avalanche transport. It appeared instead as though the truck had been gently lowered into place under the snow across 2 decades. The cab was empty. The interior coating of frost suggested it had remained sealed for years. The keys were still in the ignition. This discovery forced the county to quietly reopen portions of the earlier investigations. New forensic examinations were authorized. A second vehicle was later found during the same runoff season, partially encased in ice within an unnatural depression near the center of the corridor. It belonged to Celia Morris. Her car showed no impact damage. The doors were unlocked. The interior was empty. Search teams attempted limited excavation around these depressions using stabilized trench methods. Every time, equipment readings became unreliable once they reached a specific depth. Magnetic anomalies distorted instrument behavior. Ground radar returned inconsistent empty space results that shifted between scans. Digging operations were suspended. State authorities redirected the area into a restricted geological research zone. The public was never informed of the recovered vehicles. Since the closure, no official winter travel has been permitted through Hollow Ridge. Yet, disappearances continue. Hikers in neighboring areas occasionally report seeing tire tracks crossing open snowfields that lead toward the old road alignment. Drone patrols find no such tracks from the air. Once, during a January blizzard in 2024, a plow operator temporarily lost visual contact with the valley wall and found himself drifting toward the old western entrance. He reported seeing taillights ahead of him in the whiteout. When he stopped and radioed dispatch, asking who had clearance on the closed corridor, dispatch returned silence. The lights moved forward into the snow. The plow operator did not follow. The corridor wind accelerated. The lights vanished. No missing vehicle was reported that night. No camera recorded the movement. The only evidence exists in the plow operator's recorded radio log, stored as an anomaly report. Climatology specialists, search and rescue coordinators, and geological surveyors have all produced independent theories regarding Hollow Ridge. Some suggest a subglacial void network beneath the corridor creates localized depressions that shift under heavy snow load. Others suspect a rare form of wind-driven density inversion capable of producing vertical snow displacement without directional collapse. None of these theories explain the missing people. In private circles, rescue workers use a different phrase. They say the road does not bury people. They say the road takes them. This belief is reinforced by one final unexplained incident. In 2020, during the winter before Randall Pike vanished, a motion-activated camera near the eastern barrier captured a brief image just before it failed. The photograph shows snow flowing normally across the corridor. Then, at the center of the frame, that same tall vertical interruption appears. Behind it, partially obscured, is a human figure standing at a distance. The figure is facing the camera. The expression cannot be seen, but the silhouette matches the height and build of a man listed as missing on the road 4 years earlier. The timestamp places the image at 2:23 in the morning. No report of a person being on the road was filed that night. No emergency call was placed. Every attempt to recover higher resolution detail from the damaged file failed. The image remains in restricted evidence storage. Residents still avoid the area once snow begins to fall heavily. County workers assigned to winter monitoring refuse overnight shifts near the ridge. And every winter, when storms erase the last visible markers of Hollow Ridge Road, a small group of search coordinators quietly check the missing persons logs. Almost every year, a new name appears. The road does not connect two valleys anymore. It connects entry with absence. And when the wind howls through the buried corridor at night, carrying the muffled echo of engines idling beneath layers of shifting white, the people who live nearby no longer wonder whose vehicles they belong to. They know. Because no one has ever driven out of Hollow Ridge once the road has disappeared. And no one who has vanished there has ever been returned. In this news story, the call came in just after midnight. It was logged as routine. By sunrise, it became the final confirmed record of Ranger Eli Mercer ever being alive. Eli Mercer had worked the northern district of Redwood Trace National Preserve for 8 years. He was known among staff as methodical, quiet, and unusually strict about protocol. He never skipped check-ins, never ignored boundary rules, never altered assigned patrol routes without written authorization signed by a district supervisor. His reports were known for being brief, factual, and consistently on schedule. Among Rangers, this made him predictable. Predictable in structure, predictable in routine, predictable in caution. That is why what he did on New Year's night of 2022 still confounds every investigator who later reviewed his case. Snow had fallen steadily across the preserve since the afternoon of December 31st. By dusk, visibility dropped to less than a quarter mile in most interior zones. Wind pushed accumulation into deep drifts against service buildings and closed ranger stations. The outer winter campground had already been sealed for the season. Only essential law enforcement personnel were permitted beyond the interior access gates. Eli was assigned to overnight monitoring of the Western Access Corridor. It was considered low-risk winter duty, mostly involving weather readings, motion sensor verification, and passive wildlife movement logging. The shift normally required no physical patrol beyond the plowed perimeter road. At 11:48 that night, he completed a routine radio check with the Southern Watch Station. His voice was clear, calm. No irregularities in pulse or respiratory cadence were detected in the transmission. Wind gusting at moderate intensity. Visibility near zero in interior corridors. At 12:03, the automated perimeter system triggered a silent motion alert in Zone C7. Zone C7 was not merely restricted, it was sealed. The zone contained the remains of an abandoned wildfire observation tower and an unstable network of sink ravines beneath it. During a controlled demolition attempt 12 years earlier, underground collapse had forced evacuation of the site. Structural instability remained permanent. Protocol required that no ranger enter the zone on foot during winter months under any circumstances. Motion alerts within C7 were typically verified via aerial drone passes, thermal scans from boundary towers, or deferred until daylight. Eli acknowledged the alert at 12:04. At 12:06, instead of dispatching drone verification as required by standing orders, he did something no one expected. He keyed his radio and said only one sentence. "I am going to verify the source personally." The dispatcher on duty attempted to override the directive instantly. The system showed the transmission reached Eli's unit. There was no verbal acknowledgement. At 12:11, his GPS tracker showed movement away from the plowed patrol road and toward the closed interior trail leading directly into Zone C7. From this moment forward, every step he took violated written safety procedure. At 12:19, Eli reached the final locked barrier on foot. Camera footage from the static security tower shows him unlocking it with his issued access key. He pauses briefly before opening it. Snow obscures much of his figure. Only his reflective shoulder strip and helmet outline remain visible for several frames. No ranger had crossed that barrier on foot during winter in more than 12 years. Dispatch repeated the order for immediate return. Again, there was no response. At 12:24, his body camera activated automatically when he crossed into the sealed zone. The footage shows heavy snowfall, rapidly collapsing visibility, and the faint vertical outline of the old fire tower rising through the tree line. Wind noise dominates the audio, his breathing remains steady. He advances slowly along a narrow ridge path above the ravine network. The ground beneath the snow shows subtle sagging patterns consistent with subsurface voids. At 12:29, Eli stops walking. The camera view lifts abruptly as if he raised his head. He speaks one word, "Hello." No reply is audible. He resumes walking. At 12:33, the camera captures movement near the primary ravine edge. Something passes across the snowfield roughly 30 yards ahead. Resolution is poor due to snowfall. Digital enhancement later confirms the movement is bipedal but does not match any known wildlife gait common to the preserve. Eli stops again. He whispers, "That is not wildlife." Dispatch attempts direct voice contact repeatedly. No response is recorded. At 12:37, the first abnormal audio appears on the feed. Beneath the wind, a second sound emerges. Slow, rhythmic, almost like distant breathing layered beneath the storm. The sound remains consistent across multiple atmospheric noise filters used in later analysis. Eli sweeps his flashlight beam across the ravine. The camera catches only shadow and blowing snow. At 12:39, Eli steps closer to the ravine edge. Protocol says, "I turn back now." Pause. But something is down there. The breathing sound grows louder. Microphone distortion registers at sub-audible frequency levels consistent with vibration rather than sound. At 12:42, Eli radios. "I have visual now. I cannot classify." Dispatch demands a description. There is a delay of 4 full seconds. When Eli speaks again, his voice is altered, his rhythm becomes uneven, his volume drops. It looks like a person trying to stand inside the wrong shape. At 12:44, the camera catches a partial silhouette near the ravine floor. It is upright, facing him. Its proportions are inconsistent. The The shoulders narrow sharply upward, the limbs bend at angles that defy joint mechanics, snow accumulates around the base, but not on its surface. Light does not reflect from it normally. No footprints exist around it, no compression of snow beneath it. It appears to be resting on intact accumulation without weight displacement. Eli steps backward. The silhouette moves forward. It does not step. Distance simply collapses between them. At 12:46, Eli draws his sidearm. Do not come closer. The silhouette stops. The breathing sound ceases instantly. Total silence follows. Even wind noise drops from the microphone. The recording becomes unnaturally sterile. At 12:47, Eli whispers, "It is waiting for me to move." Dispatch orders immediate retreat. His GPS shows no movement. At 12:49, the silhouette rises. Not forward, upward, several feet without visible support. The camera auto-adjusts exposure. The outline elongates. It stretches. That is not possible. At 12:51, the audio feed spikes sharply. A new sound layer emerges. Overlapping human voices speaking in disordered fragments. None of the speech forms complete language. Eli stumbles. GPS logs show sudden acceleration away from the ravine. His breathing becomes labored. The voices increase in volume. They match his pace. At 12:54, the fire tower reappears through the snow. The silhouette is no longer visible. The voices stop. Silence. Eli whispers, "It followed me out." Dispatch demands confirmation. No reply. At 12:56, Eli reaches the locked barrier. His hands visibly tremble as he fumbles for the key. The overlapping voices return. Directly beside him, the camera jolts violently. The feed goes black. When it returns, the camera lies on its side. Eli is not in frame. The voices continue for 4 more seconds. Then they stop. At 12:57, the body camera feed ends. At 12:58, Eli's radio transmits a final 2-second burst. It contains only one sound, breathing, not his, and not alone. At 1:14, a ranger response team mobilizes. They reach the sealed gate at 2:39. The gate stands open. The access key remains in the lock. The body camera is located 20 yards inside. Eli Mercer is gone. Search operations continue for 3 days. No footprints. No blood. No damage. No remains. The ravine beneath the silhouette's last position is probed down to 20 meters. Nothing is found. Thermal scans detect no residual heat. The footage is sealed under federal park security classification. Zone C. 7 remains permanently closed. What followed in the months after Eli's disappearance was not publicized. But internal records show the following developments. Within 2 weeks of the incident, 3 separate rangers filed formal psychological strain requests and transferred out of field duty. 2 dispatchers requested permanent reassignment to non-emergency roles. 1 technician who reviewed the raw audio resigned within a month. In April of that year, survey drones performing avalanche mapping over Zone C. 7 recorded multiple thermal anomalies beneath the snowpack. Each reading appeared cylindrical, vertical, stationary. They vanished when drones descended below a specific altitude threshold. Ground radar returned empty space anomalies at identical coordinates. The preserved geology team listed the anomalies as sensor interference. Those sections were fenced beyond public maps. In late summer, controlled drilling was attempted at a depth of 16 meters. The drill encountered no rock, only empty space. Once the bit broke through into the void, internal pressure readings dropped abruptly. Equipment malfunction followed. The drill shaft was retrieved, collapsed inward, as though exposed to vacuum. The void was never breached again. By winter of the following year, motion sensors in Zone C7 continued to trigger during snowfall. No verification was attempted. The alerts were simply logged and archived. In debrief interviews, several rangers independently reported hearing radio static on their personal units when driving past the sealed zone during storms. The static resembled overlapping speech beneath snow noise. No official correlation was acknowledged. Eli Mercer remains listed as missing under hazardous winter exposure. No memorial site exists within the preserve. His route log ends at the sealed barrier. What remains unresolved is not only where Eli went, but why the thing in the ravine waited. Investigators reviewing the incident later came to a quiet consensus on one point. Whatever emerged at the ravine that night did not attack immediately. It observed. It evaluated. And when Eli attempted to leave its zone, it followed. The preserve now carries an unofficial internal rule. No ranger ever responds in person to anomalies in Zone C7 again, no matter what triggers, no matter what moves. In this new story, she texted, "He's watching me," then disappeared. Asheville, North Carolina is a city nestled deep within the Blue Ridge Mountains, known for its vibrant art scene and the dense, sprawling forests that surround the residential outskirts. State records from 2009 describe a cold October evening when a heavy fog began to roll off the peaks, reducing visibility to less than 10 feet in some of the higher elevations. Most residents reportedly viewed the winding mountain roads as a scenic part of daily life, but for those traveling alone after dark, the isolation could feel immediate and overwhelming. That perception of safety changed when local authorities received a report about a missing graduate student who had sent a series of disturbing messages before her phone went silent. Investigators never confirmed the identity of the person she claimed was following her, but the digital trail she left behind suggested a predator who knew exactly how to stay out of sight. Elena Vance was a 24-year-old graduate student at the local university who was known for her rigorous study habits and her close relationship with her family. She spent most of her days in the campus library working on a thesis that required her to stay late into the evening several times a week. On that particular Thursday, she had finished her work around 10:30 and began the 30-minute drive back to her small apartment on the edge of the national forest. State records indicate that Elena was driving a dark green SUV and appeared perfectly normal when she waved to the campus security guard at the main gate. She stopped at a local gas station just outside the city limits to buy a bottle of water and a snack for the next morning. Dispatch logs show that this was the last time she was seen on a surveillance camera, looking calm as she paid the clerk and walked back to her vehicle. Olivia Vance was Elena's older sister, a 27-year-old pediatric nurse who lived 3 states away but spoke to Elena almost every night. Around 11 o'clock that evening, Olivia was sitting in her living room when she received a text message from Elena that immediately felt out of character. The message simply said that a white van had pulled out of the gas station behind her and was keeping a very specific distance between their cars. Olivia reportedly told her sister not to worry and to keep driving toward the more populated areas of the mountain road. However, Elena replied that the van had turned off its headlights while still staying directly behind her SUV in the darkness. County files from 2009 describe how Olivia grew increasingly frantic as she realized her sister was miles away from any help. The messages between the sisters became more frequent and desperate as Elena reached the higher, more isolated sections of the mountain pass. Elena texted that every time she sped up, the van behind her matched her speed, and every time she slowed down, it did the same without trying to pass. At 11:15, Elena sent a text that said, "He's watching me through the back window. I can see his silhouette when the moon hits the glass." Olivia reportedly called Elena's cell phone immediately, but the call went straight to voicemail, which was something Elena never allowed to happen. Investigators never confirmed if the phone had been manually turned off or if the battery had suddenly failed in the cold mountain air. Olivia waited 5 minutes before calling the Asheville Police Department to report that her sister was in imminent danger. The first responding officer was Deputy Silas Thorne, a 42-year-old veteran of the county sheriff's office who was familiar with the treacherous curves of that specific road. He began patrolling the route Elena would have taken, looking for any signs of a dark green SUV or a suspicious white van. State records indicate that the fog had become so thick by midnight that the deputy had to slow his patrol car to a crawl to avoid driving off the steep embankments. He found no signs of a struggle and no vehicles pulled over on the shoulders of the primary highway leading to Elena's apartment. Archived notes suggest that the deputy checked the local rest stops and scenic overlooks, but the parking lots were entirely empty and silent. It was as if Elena and her pursuer had simply vanished into the gray mist that clung to the pine trees. The following morning, a group of hikers discovered Elena's green SUV parked in the middle of a narrow fire road nearly 5 miles away from her intended route. The vehicle was still idling, and the driver's side door was standing wide open, allowing the freezing mountain air to circulate through the cabin. Investigators never confirmed why Elena would have turned off the main highway onto a gravel road that led deeper into the wilderness. Records conflict regarding the state of the interior, though some archived notes mention that Elena's purse and keys were still sitting on the passenger seat. There were no signs of broken glass or a physical struggle inside the car, which led some locals to claim that she might have been coerced into leaving the vehicle. A single footprint was found in the mud near the rear tire, but it didn't match the shoes Elena was wearing when she left the gas station. Dispatch logs from the search and rescue operation indicate that over 50 volunteers and 3 canine units were deployed to the area within hours of the discovery. The dogs reportedly picked up Elena's scent near the open door, but they lost the trail abruptly at the edge of a steep ravine about 50 yards from the car. Some locals claimed that the terrain was too difficult for a person to navigate in the dark without a flashlight, yet no flashlight was found in the SUV or on the ground. State records show that the search continued for 10 days, covering over 20 square miles of dense forest and rocky outcroppings. Investigators never confirmed any sightings of the white van that Elena had described in her final text messages to her sister. It seemed the vehicle had never entered any of the monitored intersections or passed by any other businesses with working cameras. Olivia Vance arrived in Asheville 2 days after the disappearance and spent her time reviewing the phone records and the texts her sister had sent. She noticed a final unsent message in Elena's outbox that had been composed at 11:23, just minutes before the phone lost power. The message was a blurry photo taken through the rearview mirror, showing a pair of headlights and the faint outline of a driver. Archive notes from 2009 describe how digital forensic experts tried to enhance the image, but the glare from the fog made it impossible to identify a face. Some investigators believed the headlights were too high off the ground to belong to a standard van, suggesting the vehicle might have been a larger truck or a modified SUV. Records conflict on whether this evidence was ever used to narrow down a list of potential suspects in the local area. During the investigation, detectives interviewed a 48-year-old mechanic named Arthur Penhaligon who worked at the gas station Elena had visited. He reportedly had a history of making female customers feel uncomfortable, but he had a solid alibi for the night Elena disappeared. State records indicate that Arthur was on a recorded landline call with his brother during the exact time Elena was being followed on the mountain road. Investigators never confirmed if he had any connection to the mysterious white van or if he had shared Elena's destination with anyone else. Archive notes suggest that the gas station's logbooks were missing several pages from that week, but the owner claimed it was due to a clerical error. The mechanic eventually moved out of the state, and he was never officially named as a suspect in the disappearance of Elena Vance. 3 years after the event, a county file from 2009 revealed that a similar incident had occurred on the same stretch of road back in the late 1970s. A young woman had reported being followed by a vehicle with its lights off, but she had managed to reach a ranger station before anything happened. Investigators never confirmed if there was a link between the two cases or if a single individual had been preying on travelers for decades. Some locals claimed that the mountains held dead zones where radio and cell signals were intentionally jammed, though no such devices were ever recovered. The case of Elena Vance remained cold, with no new leads or physical evidence surfacing despite the best efforts of the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation. It's a chilling reminder that the vastness of the American wilderness can swallow a person whole, leaving only a few terrifying sentences behind. The mystery of the white van continues to haunt the community of Asheville, and Olivia Vance still returns to the mountain road every October to hang flyers. She often tells reporters that she can still feel her sister's fear when she reads those final text messages on her old phone. State records indicate that the case is still technically open, but with no body and no weapon, there is little the authorities can do to move forward. Investigators never confirmed the motive, but the calculated nature of the pursuit suggested someone who was very comfortable operating in the dark. Dispatch logs show that there have been 3 other reports of phantom vehicles in the area since 2009, but none have resulted in a disappearance. Some believe the person is still out there, waiting for the fog to roll in before they pick their next target on the winding mountain passes. Today, the green SUV sits in a police impound lot, a silent witness to whatever happened in the final moments of Elena's journey. The fire road where it was found has since been gated off by the Forest Service to prevent further incidents or unauthorized trespassing. People who hike in the area sometimes report hearing the sound of an idling engine in the distance, but when they go to investigate, there is nothing but the wind in the trees. Records conflict regarding whether Elena had any stalkers prior to that night, but her friends insisted she was a private person who kept to herself. Archived notes from 2009 remain the only official narrative of a night that began with a study session and ended with a desperate cry for help. We may never know what she saw in that rearview mirror or who was really watching her from the shadows of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The story of Elena Vance serves as a dark, cautionary tale for those who travel through the isolated regions of the United States. It highlights the vulnerability we all face when our technology fails, and we are left alone with our instincts in the middle of nowhere. Investigators never confirmed if the he in Elena's text was someone she recognized or a total stranger who happened to spot her at the gas station. The ambiguity of the evidence and the lack of a resolution continue to frustrate the family and the local detectives who worked the case. State records will forever hold the transcript of those final texts, a digital ghost of a woman who was just trying to get home. Every time the fog settles over the city of Asheville, the residents are reminded of the girl who was being watched, and the van that left no tracks is less than has hone. Zero hash is greater than. In a strange postscript to the investigation, a local hunter found a discarded metal thermos and a heavy work jacket near the ravine where the dogs had lost the scent. The items were weathered and had been exposed to the elements for years, making it difficult to extract any DNA or fingerprints. Investigators never confirmed if these items belonged to a suspect or if they were simply trash left behind by a previous hiker. However, the jacket had a small name tag on the inside that had been intentionally scratched out with a sharp object. Records conflict on whether this discovery was ever shared with the Vance family or if it was kept confidential for the sake of the ongoing inquiry. Some locals claimed the jacket looked like the ones worn by the maintenance crews who worked on the mountain power lines during the 1980s. The silence of the mountains is often interrupted by the stories of those who never came back from the peak. For the people of Asheville, the name Elena Vance is synonymous with the dangers of the night and the mystery of the man who watches. Dispatch logs and state records provide a framework for the tragedy, but the core of the story remains hidden in the shadows of the forest. Investigators never confirmed the final location of Elena's cell phone, which has never been recovered despite multiple electronic pings in the days following her disappearance. It is a case defined by what is missing: a suspect, a motive, and a young woman who was just reaching the prime of her life. As long as the case remains unsolved, the white van remains a terrifying specter on the mountain roads of North Carolina. In this new story, she was alive when they buried her. The outskirts of Mansfield, Ohio, are defined by a landscape of rolling hills, dense deciduous forests, and the long shadows of industrial structures that have seen better days. State records from 1994 describe a region that was struggling with a series of unexplained disappearances that had the local population on edge for most of the autumn season. Most residents reportedly viewed the surrounding woodlands as a place for seasonal hunting or quiet reflection, but that perception changed during the final week of October. Local authorities received a frantic call from a cemetery groundskeeper who had discovered something horrifying during his routine morning rounds near the back edge of the property. Investigators never confirmed the exact identity of the perpetrator in the immediate aftermath, but the physical evidence left behind at the scene told a story of a crime that was far more calculated and cruel than a standard homicide. Samuel Vance was a 38-year-old groundskeeper who had worked at the Pine Ridge Cemetery for over 12 years without ever encountering a significant issue. He was known as a meticulous man who took great pride in the upkeep of the historic graves and the winding gravel paths that snaked through the older sections of the yard. On this particular morning, the frost was heavy on the grass and a thick layer of fog clung to the low-lying areas near the creek bed. State records indicate that Samuel was driving his small utility tractor toward the northern perimeter to clear away some fallen branches when he noticed a patch of freshly turned earth. This specific area was not scheduled for any new burials, and the soil looked uneven, as if it had been moved in a great hurry during the dark hours of the night. Samuel reportedly felt a sense of unease as he stepped off his tractor and approached the disturbed ground with a handheld shovel. The soil in this part of Ohio is heavy with clay, making it difficult to dig without specialized equipment, yet someone had managed to create a shallow depression nearly 6 feet long. County files from 2009 describe how the groundskeeper noticed a corner of blue fabric poking through the dirt barely an inch below the surface. He stopped digging immediately and used his radio to contact the main office, requesting that they notify the county sheriff as soon as possible. Investigators never confirmed what Samuel was thinking during those quiet minutes while he waited for the police to arrive, but he later told reporters that the air felt unnaturally still near that patch of earth. Detective Laura Bennett was a 45-year-old investigator with the Richland County Sheriff's Department who had seen her fair share of tragedy during her 20-year career. She arrived at the cemetery shortly after 9 o'clock and ordered the area to be cordoned off with yellow tape before any further excavation took place. State records indicate that the detective noted the lack of footprints in the surrounding frost, suggesting the person who moved the dirt had been very careful to obscure their tracks. As the forensic team began to carefully remove the layers of clay and silt, they uncovered the body of a young woman who appeared to be dressed for a night out. Archive notes suggest that the victim was lying on her side, a detail that struck the investigators as highly unusual for a clandestine burial. The victim was soon identified as Clara Sterling, a 29-year-old librarian from a nearby town who had been reported missing by her roommate 3 days earlier. Clara was described by friends as a reliable and cautious person who rarely took risks and always kept her family informed of her whereabouts. On the night she disappeared, state records indicate that she had left work at 5 o'clock and stopped at a local grocery store before seemingly vanishing into the autumn twilight. Investigators never confirmed if she had been followed from her workplace or if she had encountered her attacker at a random location along her usual route home. Dispatch logs from that evening show no reports of a struggle or any suspicious vehicles parked near the library or her apartment complex. The initial medical examination of Clara Sterling revealed a series of findings that would eventually lead to the most disturbing realization in the history of the county. While there were bruises on her wrists and ankles suggesting she had been restrained, there were no fatal wounds or signs of internal trauma that would explain her death. State records indicate that the medical examiner found a significant amount of fine dirt and clay particles inside her lungs and windpipe, a discovery that sent a shockwave through the investigative team. This physical evidence suggested that Clara had been inhaling the soil while it was being shoveled over her body in the shallow grave. Investigators never confirmed exactly how long she had been unconscious before the burial began, but the data suggested she was very much alive when the first layer of earth hit her face. County files from 2009 detail the autopsy findings, which mentioned that Clara's fingernails were heavily damaged and contained traces of the same clay found in the grave. This led to the harrowing conclusion that she had regained consciousness after being buried and had spent her final moments trying to claw her way through the heavy Ohio soil. Records conflict regarding the estimated depth of the dirt above her, but most forensic experts agreed that the weight of the wet clay would have made it impossible for an average person to move. Some locals claimed that the perpetrator must have known the soil conditions well enough to realize that Clara would be trapped without any hope of escape. The sheer cruelty of leaving someone to wake up in total darkness beneath the earth was something the detectives struggled to comprehend during the early stages of the case. As the investigation into Clara Sterling's life deepened, Detective Bennett began to look at the people she had interacted with in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. State records show that Clara had recently ended a brief relationship with a 32-year-old man named Thomas Miller, who worked as a heavy equipment operator for a local construction firm. Thomas reportedly had a history of possessive behavior and had been seen parked outside Clara's apartment on at least 2 occasions after their breakup. Investigators never confirmed his whereabouts for the night of the disappearance, as Thomas claimed he was at a bar in a neighboring county where no one could specifically vouch for his timeline. Archived notes from 2009 suggest that his knowledge of digging and soil types made him a person of significant interest to the sheriff's department. Thomas Miller was brought in for questioning several times, but he remained remarkably calm and cooperative throughout the entire process. He insisted that he had nothing to do with Clara's death and that he had been trying to move on with his life after she ended their relationship. State records indicate that his vehicle, a dark gray pickup truck, was searched by forensic technicians who found traces of clay on the floorboards and in the bed of the truck. However, the clay was so common in the Mansfield area that it was impossible to definitively link it to the specific soil found at the Pine Ridge Cemetery. Investigators never confirmed if they had enough evidence to secure a warrant for his arrest, and the case began to stall as no direct witnesses to the kidnapping came forward. Dispatch logs from the week of the disappearance were reviewed once again, and a small, overlooked detail began to emerge from the archives. A resident living near the cemetery had called in a report about a vehicle with a loud muffler idling near the back gate at 2 o'clock in the morning on the night Clara vanished. The witness couldn't provide a make or model, but they mentioned seeing a single figure moving back and forth between the trees with a flashlight. County files from 2009 describe how this lead was pursued, but the lack of a license plate number made it difficult to track the vehicle in a pre-surveillance camera era. Some locals claimed that the cemetery had been a popular spot for teenagers to hang out, leading some investigators to wonder if the witness had simply seen a group of trespassers rather than the killer. The psychological impact of the case on the town of Mansfield was profound, as the details of Clara's final moments became public knowledge through leaked court documents. People began to double-check their locks and avoid walking alone after dark, fearing that a predator was stalking the quiet streets of their community. State records indicate that sales of home security systems and pepper spray spiked in the months following the discovery at the cemetery. Investigators never confirmed if the perpetrator was a local resident or someone who had been passing through the area, but the precision of the burial suggested a familiarity with the graveyard's layout. The idea that a killer could spend hours digging a grave in a public place without being caught was a terrifying prospect for the local authorities. 6 months into the investigation, a new piece of evidence surfaced when a hiker found a small leather-bound journal in a ravine 3 miles from the cemetery. The journal belonged to Clara Sterling and contained entries that described a series of strange phone calls she had been receiving at her workplace. State records show that Clara had never mentioned these calls to her roommate or the police, possibly because she didn't want to appear paranoid. The entries described a man who would call and stay silent for several minutes, breathing heavily before hanging up without saying a word. Archive notes from 2009 suggest that these calls started approximately 3 weeks before her disappearance and increased in frequency as the days went by. Investigators never confirmed the origin of the calls, as the technology to trace them in 1994 was limited, and the library's phone system did not keep detailed logs. The journal also mentioned a specific encounter Clara had at a local park where a man in a white sedan had stopped to ask her for directions. She noted that he seemed overly friendly and tried to keep her talking for much longer than was necessary for a simple navigational question. Records conflict on whether this man matched the description of Thomas Miller or any other known associates of the victim. County files from 2009 describe how detectives attempted to locate the white sedan, but the description was too generic for a town where hundreds of similar vehicles were registered. Some investigators believed that this man might have been a different predator altogether, one who was hunting for a specific type of victim rather than targeting Clara for personal reasons. Detective Bennett remained convinced that the key to the case lay within the cemetery itself and the specific way the grave had been prepared. She consulted with a forensic geologist who analyzed the layers of soil found on Clara's clothing and compared them to the site. The geologist noted that the grave had been dug in a way that bypassed the rocky upper crust of the soil, targeting a pocket of softer clay that would be easier to move quickly. State records indicate that this suggested the killer had either scouted the location beforehand or had prior knowledge of the cemetery's geology. Investigators never confirmed if any former employees of the cemetery had been screened for a connection to the crime. Archive notes suggest that several seasonal workers had been fired for various infractions in the years prior, but none of them had a history of violent behavior. The case of Clara Sterling eventually went cold as the years passed, and no new physical evidence was discovered to link a suspect to the scene. Thomas Miller eventually moved out of state and was never heard from again, though he remained a person of interest in the eyes of the local sheriff's department. State records show that the file was reviewed every 5 years, but the lack of DNA evidence from the crime scene made it difficult to utilize modern forensic techniques. In 1994, the preservation of touch DNA was not a standard practice, and much of the evidence had been contaminated during the initial excavation. Investigators never confirmed if the killer had intended for Clara to wake up underground, or if they simply thought she was already dead when they covered her with the earth. Today, the back edge of the Pine Ridge Cemetery is a quiet and overgrown area that is rarely visited by the public or the groundskeeping staff. A small, unofficial memorial marker was placed near the site by Clara's family, but it has since been weathered by the harsh Ohio winters. People who live near the cemetery sometimes report seeing lights moving through the trees late at night, but these reports are usually dismissed as light reflections from the nearby highway. Records conflict on whether any other similar crimes have occurred in the region since 1994, but the memory of the girl who was buried alive continues to linger in the local lore. Some believe that the killer is still out there, living a normal life, while the truth remains buried beneath the clay of Mansfield. In 2009, a review of the county files revealed a startling detail that had been buried in the original witness statements from the groundskeeper. Samuel Vance had mentioned finding a small, rusted bell lying near the edge of the grave, but it had been dismissed as a piece of trash at the time. State records indicate that the bell was similar to those used in the 19th century as safety coffins for people who feared being buried alive. Investigators never confirmed if the bell was an intentional placement by the killer as a morbid joke, or if it was a historical artifact that had been churned up by the digging. The presence of the bell added a layer of psychological horror to the case that suggested a deep, dark obsession with the theme of premature burial. It remains one of the most chilling and unexplained aspects of the entire investigation. The story of Clara Sterling is often cited in criminal justice courses in Ohio as an example of the limitations of forensic science in the late 20th century. It highlights the importance of preserving the crime scene and the tragic consequences when the perpetrator is one step ahead of the investigators. State records for the case remain open, and the Richland County Sheriff's Department still accepts tips from the public regarding any information related to the white sedan or the silent phone calls. Investigators never confirmed the motive, but the legacy of the case is a reminder that the most terrifying monsters are often the ones who walk among us without making a sound. The silence of the grave is the only thing that remains for certain in the mystery of Mansfield.